I don't think there's a more essential issue than the issue of climate change.
The future of the auto industry is electric. There's no turning back.
This is a preview of things to come.
More Americans could soon get the chance to drive a vehicle made in China.
The new vehicles that we're making at Ford are data collection machines. They're like mobile drones.
We're going to be noisy, we're going to be disruptive, we're going to be unignorable, we're going to be a pain in the arse until you listen to us.
Officials have begun a major investigation into whether someone or many people benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday. Not long before the attacks occurred, there were some financial transactions in the stock market that may indicate knowledge of the attack before it began. If they ever get to the bottom of it, it will be astonishing.
Peter, what many Wall Street analysts believe is that the terrorists made bets that a number of stocks would see their prices fall. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge, unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against.
This could very well be insider trading at the worst, most horrific, most evil use you've ever seen in your entire life.
Our intelligence people are not only knew about in advance, but probably involved. There's no question. You cannot possibly have an operation of this magnitude without our people knowing about it.
Truth is not a given.
Vaccine,
GMOs,
Jeffrey Epstein,
UFOs.
Splashed. Mark bearing a range.
There are those who want the truth suppressed, sequestered, and exploited. Then there are those who want the truth revealed, disseminated, and uncensored. You are one of those people.
Chester Bennington. He was 41 years old and the artist was found dead.
I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
Hundreds of abusive clergy.
It was unidentified, and that's why it was so unsettling.
You deserve the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
What's up, everybody? I hope my connection is solid. Today is August 17th, 2026. Welcome to Dauntless Live. I am your host, Adam Riva. No, this is not a glitch in the Matrix. I tried to do this show last week, I kind of fumbled the ball. Well, I checked everything, and everything, as far as I could tell, was running properly and smoothly, but my microphone was not picking up audio, even though it was on, even though it was showing in OBS. I could see my levels moving, so I have no clue. I should probably make sure, actually, that you guys can hear me right now. Leave me a thumbs up if you can. I have built in some new checks and balances into the show. Okay, good. You can hear me. So I'm going to do some new checks and balances. So moving forward, that shouldn't happen again. My goodness. We've never claimed to be the most professional show. It's held together with duct tape and bubble gum. But I'm honored that you're here with me. This is such a treat to broadcast to all of you wherever in the world you are. It's a treat. It's my privilege. We have a few announcements we're going to get through today before we get to the content. So if you're watching this if you're watching this at a later date, feel free to skip forward. So first of all, I'm having an awesome week. I just want to mention I attempted one of my dream tricks on a tumble track in gymnastics. This is a round off double backflip, and I was this close to landing it. I think I'm going to land it this week. So I'm having a great week, and that was a lot of fun. We have a bunch of content in the works right now. We have Order Out of Chaos Volume 6 Put Options by Rise Attire. It's getting the finishing touches right now, and so that should be out very soon, just in time for the 25th anniversary of 9/11. This is a deep dive that I wrote and Adrian edited. It's narrated by myself. The Order Out of Chaos series is a collaborative series. Some of them were edited by Mouthy Buddha, Loyal 9, myself, and now Adrian. And so every episode has a different flavor. You guys are going to love this one. Even if you're aware of the put options rabbit hole regarding 9/11, as always, I think we go way further down the rabbit hole. We've uncovered some really incredible gems that we're going to present in that episode. Also, Simon Essler's second and third installments of You Are Here are being polished, and he's in the latter stages of near completion, so we're very excited about that. However, it is with great dismay that I have to share some news with you regarding Jason Burmis, who is still very active on social media, and yet he has gone AWOL from the project, from Dauntless. I started to see some red flags a few months ago, and frankly, I felt like I had to cover for him, and I was doing my best to kind of hold space and procrastinate while I thought he might be working. And the man has ditched the project. He stopped talking to me. I can't get an answer from him. I've tried texting him, calling him, emailing him repeatedly, and giving him, at this point, it's been months since I've seen anything out of him. Weeks, actually over a month since I've heard from him. And so he's still very active on social media, and it's just the most bizarre thing. I can't begin to offer an explanation for it. I don't know what his motivations are. I feel I feel very disappointed by the situation. I feel a bit betrayed, and it is what it is. I'm not trying to badmouth Jason. I don't know what his situation is, but he's still very active on social media. He's just no longer talking to me. And of course, I went back through our chat history, and I'm looking like, did I say something that could have rubbed him the wrong way? I can't offer any explanation. I don't think I'm that irritating of a person. I thought, we've always been friends, and I thought that we had a really good collaboration going, and I'm sorry to dump this drama drama out there. I don't want to air dirty laundry. I gave him, the past month to move forward in some sort of way to resolve the situation. I said, hey, look, just give me access to the project so that I can get it into the end zone, so that I can complete it. And he's just ghosting me. He's ghosting me for some reason. And I don't know what's going on in his personal life. I don't know if he's got some issues, something that he's, hiding. But clearly he's not. It seems like he's derelict in the project. It's not going to be completed. This is a big disappointment for Dauntless fans. I've advertised this now for the past 6 months. The first episode was supposed to be done 3 months in, and here we are almost 8 months in. And so to me, all signs point to he's taken the money and run. And I'm not trying to tarnish his reputation. I wish I didn't have to do this, but I can't get an explanation out of him, and you guys want an explanation out of me, and I'm tired of waiting. I'm tired of getting ghosted, and I'm tired of the disrespect and the unprofessionalism. So that's all out there now, and it's public, and I'm sorry, and I'm a really nice guy. I really didn't want to have to bring this news to you guys. So I'm going to be taking down at the Epstein Files series page from our website, and we're going to try to find somebody new to collaborate with. Unfortunately, that's money that I guess I have to kiss goodbye. A lot of money. And it's not like we're loaded here. It's not like we're, the Daily Wire or something with, all these financial backers. We're funded by you. We don't take ads. We don't do ad reads. We try to keep it very basic here. And so I'm sorry, guys. I'm probably even more disappointed than all of you. Of course, this is a bad reflection on the brand, but we're going to move forward. And I hope that Jason somehow, someday does the right thing, but I'm not holding my breath. All right, guys. With that out of the way, I just want to direct you over to our website, dauntlessdialogue.com. We produce awesome stuff. You already know what it is. We make incredible documentaries and films. Looks like I have a bit of a lag. Give me a thumbs up in the chat if things are coming through clearly. I can't tell if the lag is just on my side or not. And your subscription funds independent content creators to expose evil and make some really cool entertainment in the process. So we could use your subscription. Click that big purple and blue subscription button on the top right, and you'll find that we have several options here. Looks like the stream is down. Okay, there we are. I just want to check the quality here. We made it like an hour into the show last week before anybody said anything about the show not having audio. So if you guys notice anything, please let me know. You can sign up for the basic plan, the value plan, or the gold pass, and you'll get lifetime premium membership access. All right, I just wanted to check. It looks like it's coming through. All right. We're going to get into today's subject matter. And if there's any lags or glitches or audio delays or anything, just let me know in the chat, please. I'm not going to ask again, but this week we're going to be talking about blue zones. Blue zones are controversial, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. We're going to clear it up and set the record straight today. And we're going to talk about what blue zones are, how they were discovered, and where they're located. We're going to go through the scrutiny of the longevity claims, such as age validation problems, record keeping issues, and potential exaggerations, and how scientists validate the authenticity of the population's ages. We're going to go into the reasons behind the disappearance of most blue zones, except for one, which continues to thrive in California in the United States, despite being surrounded by American pressures. We're going to go through the 9 essential characteristics of diet, lifestyle, and psychosocial factors that blue zones have in common. We're going to talk about the official blue zones dietary guidelines. We're going to put the blue zones and the red, white, and blue zone, America, head to head with a comparison of key factors, including diet, physical activity, psychosocial factors, and other shared traits. We're going to ask the question, does red wine support longevity? Does religion have anything to do with longevity? We're going to talk about the red, white, and blue zone, America, and our health crisis here, marked by chronic disease, pharmaceutical dependence, and declining lifespan across the board, ultra-processed food dominance, fiber deficiency, sedentary lifestyle, social isolation, and other factors. We're going to talk about the Hispanic paradox. What is that? Why Mexican Americans live longer than native-born Americans despite their lower socioeconomic status. We're going to look at why American health outcomes began to sharply decline during World War II and why they continue to worsen decade after decade. We are going to talk about the shift from backyard gardens and small family farms on the scale of 5 to 50 acres to the shift to these large monocrop fields and CAFOs, which are concentrated animal feedlot operations, where they have hundreds of thousands of heads of cattle or chickens or turkeys or pigs, and the use of chemical pesticides. We're going to go through the U.S. government's propagandistic push during World War II for so-called victory flocks and the production of more eggs, more milk, more pork, and what that did to our health. We're going to talk about what actually separates thriving populations from declining populations and identify the real modifiable risk factors, which is to say the things that are in your control that you can change. You can't change your genetics. You can change your epigenetics. You can change your lifestyle. You can change your diet, and you can change your environment. And so we're going to talk about how that's going to play a role like it does in the blue zones. And we're going to summarize with some practical evidence-based strategies that Americans can adopt without relying on overhyped narratives that you're going to hear coming out of the mouths of various social media influencers. As always, I am not a doctor. I'm not a nutrition scientist. I'm just a journalist. And I always direct my audience to go to the nutrition scientists themselves. Don't even go to the doctors in most cases. And when I say go to the doctors, I mean for nutrition advice. Like, they are trained in drugs and surgery. And if you want nutritional information that's of quality, where do you start? Well, you start by watching our lecture that we did a couple months ago called How to Find Truthful Nutrition Information. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more of it, smash that like button, share this show with your friends. We really appreciate you supporting Dauntless and hanging out with us here this evening. We're going to have a good chat. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat. Now, to sort of frame the problem, if we look back at the past half century, the American healthcare system has been burdened by multiple simultaneous chronic disease epidemics pretty much across the board. You have autoimmune disorders on the rise, obesity skyrocketing, every type of cancer going up. You have atherosclerosis and heart disease, type 2 diabetes, coronary heart disease, dementia and Alzheimer's. Across the board, everything is skyrocketing. You even have autism, which is like an exponential increase. And so I'm not going to put forward any kind of argument today that this is all due to one thing, but we are going to talk broadly about some of the underlying factors. And I just want to mention that this will tie in very nicely with a previous lecture I did recently called The Unifying Theory of Chronic Disease, Shared Pathways, Shared Solutions, where we went through the hypothesis put forward by Dr. Dean Ornish in his book Undo It, where he discusses the very compelling hypothesis that the manifold diseases that develop are etiologically similar in their shared pathways. There's a finite amount of shared pathways that you can point to that manifest in a variety of ways across the population based on dietary patterns, based on age, sex, ethnicity, and other genetic attributes. And ultimately, those universal pathways that are common to all humans, this is why you will see things in the blue zones that are common, common solutions, common tactics, common dietary and lifestyle and psychosocial factors. They mimic the factors that Dr. Dean Ornish uses in his, diet, which is ranked number one in the world for heart disease, and that's the number one killer, of course. So if you're going to eat one diet that, you're going to try to hedge your chances against early mortality, well, heart disease being the number one killer of humans, that would be, I think, the way to go would be the Ornish diet, some variation of that. And, as we go through the information today, I just want to mention there's so much overlap with that presentation. And so U.S. life expectancy has actually peaked and started to decline in 2014, which was pre-COVID. And so this isn't affected by those numbers, and it only had a partial recovery afterward. So think about that for a minute, because America is the largest and most powerful, most profitable nation in the world, and we have every reason to be doing well and thriving. But of course, there are so many factors here. Our vaccine mandates, which have recently been changed, but the importation of GMO crops and certain pesticides that are banned in other countries. And there are many reasons. And we're not going to try to put our finger on one reason because it's multifactorial. But nonetheless, we are not doing well. We are not thriving. And decade after decade, you have more drug dependency, you have higher rates of chronic disease, and pretty brutal mortality statistics. It peaked at 78.9 years in 2014 and then declined for 3 consecutive years, which is, as we mentioned, very unusual for a high-income country outside of a war or a pandemic, of course. And by 2019, it had recovered only modestly to about 78.8, just 0.1 years below, 1/10 of a year below where it had peaked in 2014. Now, in contrast, the original blue zones, at least, which are regions which have much greater longevity. Sorry, I was just reading a text message. These are areas across the world that have about 10 times the concentration of centenarians, individuals who live past 100. Also, they have lower rates of middle-age mortality. There are a number of things we can talk about. We're going to identify today about their diet, their lifestyle, and psychosocial factors that play into this. And these are sort of presented as natural experiments. These are not interventional trials set up by a bunch of scientists. These are just very interesting cases, experiments that we can look at, where we can look at how certain aspects, certain factors affect lifespan, health span, that sort of thing. So the Blue Zones organization was founded by Dan Buettner along with a team of researchers. They distilled findings down from about 150 dietary surveys. He was working for National Geographic at the time, and this struck him as a very interesting thing. Why were these isolated regions flourishing? And he identified 5 key regions we're going to show you in a moment. And these 5 regions have now dwindled to 1. So we're going to talk about that too. And from these dietary surveys and other research, they found that there was about 10 guidelines that these blue zone populations follow that we could perhaps follow ourselves. So we're going to pull up a map now. Actually, before we do that, here is the Blue Zones organization. You can go to bluezones.com. It's even now a brand on the shelves in your local grocery store. They present their research. They present travel options for you to go there. And people have gone there and they've reported some things that seem to conflict with what the Blue Zones organization puts forward. We will talk about those things. Don't you worry. We're going to get into all the controversy. They talk about how the Danish twin study established that only 20% of how long the average person lives is dictated by genes, while about 80% is influenced by lifestyle and environment. How cool is that? You might remember the Blue Zones because they had a Netflix documentary, docu-series, and it's called Live to 100 Secrets of the Blue Zones. So if you want more information after this, I encourage you to watch it. It's a pretty good watch. Here are the Blue Zones. These are the 5 original Blue Zones. Loma Linda in California, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria in Greece, and Okinawa in Japan. Now, Loma Linda is the only remaining blue zone, as the other 4 blue zones have adopted westernized diets that stray very far from the traditional roots that their ancestors ate. And within just 1 or 2 generations, these no longer geographically isolated regions are exhibiting the same sort of chronic disease rates as the rest of the world. So they're no longer anything special. The blue zones, the work that Dan Buettner did, followed demographic research originally done by Michael Poulain, Gianna Pes, and others. Apologies if I butchered their names. And so I'd like to now read a quick excerpt from one of my favorite books, How Not to Age, by Dr. Michael Greger, who is a fellow of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. And he's got this incredible book called How Not to Age. It has 13,000 citations. It's really, really well done. And we're going to talk about how the blue zones are no longer blue. And by the way, they earned their name because the original demographers just used a blue marker to sort of circle those regions, and they're like, oh, they're blue zones. He says, to study the lifestyle habits of our eldest elders, you first have to establish how old people really are. Centenarian science has long been plagued by rampant age exaggeration. According to an editor of the Guinness Book of World Records, no single subject is more obscured by vanity, deceit, falsehood, and deliberate fraud than the extremes of human longevity. It's a tale as old as time, dating back at least to biblical times, with boasts of patriarch Methuselah living to 969. One of the most famous blows to the credibility of studies of long-lived individuals was a 1973 cover story in National Geographic. It fascinated readers with its description of extraordinary rates of centenarians in the Caucasus region of the former Soviet Union the Hunza Valley in Pakistan, and the village of Vilcabamba in Ecuador. Under closer inspection, however, not only had none of the centenarians actually reached 100 years of age, but none of the nonagenarians had even made it to 90. Given the age exaggeration, whether for social status or to promote local tourism, the average 100-year-old turned out to be 84. The debacle was eventually recognized and acknowledged by the physician author, but not before casting a shadow over the entire field. Despite this inauspicious start, there are now more than a dozen major ongoing studies of actual centenarians that can offer insight into their exceptional longevity. And so legitimate academic criticism does exist, and there are people in the podcast circuit who just want to crap all over the blue zone, phenomenon, and they're going to tell you that it's really nothing to shake a stick at. And what they're really saying is that, the claims are that if you eat exactly as they eat and you do exactly as they do, that you will definitely live past 100. Now, of course, that's not accurate. And no, I'm not claiming that. No one that I know is claiming that. I think that's the sort of layman interpretation of the message. But it's, of course, far more nuanced than that. Anytime you're talking about population outcomes, you're talking about a big bell curve. And so there are individuals who are considered outliers who are always going to be genetically gifted and, outperform the norm. And those are the individuals who are living past 100 in any region. And so the blue zone diet and lifestyle and psychosocial factors, if they're going to do anything, if they promise us or offer us anything, it's that it's going to nudge the bell curve over. It's not going to guarantee anyone anything. You're not going to live past 100 for sure. It's more of hedging your odds that you're going to have a longer health span and a longer lifespan. And so extreme longevity records tend to concentrate in regions with historically poor birth registration, high poverty, and incentives for pension fraud and clerical error. And for those reasons, those regions have been left out. So, there's heaps of other statistical anomalies in some data sets. And again, the scientists understand those concerns, and for those reasons they exclude them. However, there are age validated regions, and this is where they do have good record keeping, and you can cross-check against church records, civil registries, and genealogical reconstructions rather than just self-reporting. All right. I'm going to read another excerpt now. Let's see. Again, we are reading an excerpt from How Not to Age. Whoops. So when we talk about the disappearance of the blue zones, we're talking about the disappearance of 4 of the original 5. These were all geographically isolated. The one that remains has never been geographically isolated. So think about that. The 4 that were geographically cut off from the culture, the supermarkets, the commercialization, the westernization, the excesses of the mainland or of the big cities, they were, they eventually disappeared. Their rates of longevity and health span sort of acquiesced to whatever their surrounding areas were. The only one that wasn't geographically isolated has endured. And so we're going to get into the reasons why that is. And so Dr. Greger talks about Okinawa. He says, sadly, Okinawan longevity is a thing of the past. Okinawa is now home to more than a dozen KFC restaurants, and Okinawans' saturated fat intake levels have tripled in the years since World War II. They went from eating essentially no cholesterol on a daily basis to a few Big Macs worth. They tripled their sodium intake and are now as potassium deficient as Americans, getting less than half the recommended minimum daily intake of 4,700 milligrams. In just 2 generations, Okinawans have gone from the leanest Japanese to the fattest. As a consequence, there has been a resurgence of interest from public health professionals in getting Okinawans to eat the Okinawan diet too. The same can be said of nearly all the other blue zones, like those in the Mediterranean. They are artifacts of history. Only one blue zone survives and thrives to this day in the modern era, the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. Another aspect that sets it apart is that it is non-distinctly situated. It's surrounded by the rest of American society. All the other blue zones were geographically isolated from their respective mainlands as mostly islands or peninsulas, which allowed for the maintenance of divergent diets and lifestyles. The diets of other blue zones were also economically constrained. People were in effect forced to eat healthier. For example, the average Okinawan wasn't eating much meat, sugar, salt, cooking oil, and polished white rice because they simply couldn't afford it. Okinawa was Japan's poorest prefecture. After World War II, their reliance on sweet potatoes went from forming the bulk of their diet to constituting less than 5%, as imported white rice and bread started to crowd out healthier foods. In contrast, the United States is one of the richest countries in the world, with an average per capita GDP exceeding $65,000 a year, yet ranks as low as 45th in life expectancy. What can we learn from the Adventists in Loma Linda, the one remaining active blue zone community right here in the United States that seems to exceed all others in terms of life expectancy? How have they been able to retain their healthy eating habits surrounded by the excesses of the modern world? Adventists have a health philosophy built around a biblical notion that the human body should be treated as a temple. Wow, what a concept, right? As such, they've been promoting vegetarian eating for more than 140 years. Adventists are unique in that the majority have adopted a meat-free or low-meat diet. In the Adventist Health Study 2, for example, which has been following nearly 100,000 North American Adventists for more than a decade, approximately 50% are vegetarian or vegan, and the other half only eat meat about 3 times a week on average. So, Loma Linda, California is not only the only remaining blue zone, and it's not only the one blue zone that was not geographically isolated, it's also the longest living blue zone. So out of the original 5, it came in first place for the highest concentration of centenarians and the longest expected lifespan. And so whatever they are doing should turn heads. The Adventist community maintains plant-forward eating, Sabbath rest, community structure, and low smoking rates, even while surrounded by the broader American food and lifestyle environment. Adventist health studies continue to document multi-year life expectancy advantages, roughly 4 to 11 years, depending on sex and degree of adherence. And so, what can we learn from the blue zones? Let's dive in. So, the first thing we're going to talk about are they call them the Power 9. These are like the distilled commonalities. So, natural daily movement. Oh, I think I have a chart here. So, natural daily movement. Wow, my computer is lagging. Here we go. A sense of purpose. Stress downshifting rituals, plant-forward diet with moderate caloric intake, moderate alcohol in some zones, not the Adventists, limited meat, belonging to a faith community, prioritizing family, and healthy social circles. And so you can see here, move naturally, live with purpose, downshift. That could be a siesta, or it could be, a Sabbath. 80% rule. So you fill up your belly 80% instead of to max capacity or beyond. Plant, slant, that's self-explanatory. Wine at 5, we're going to come back to that because there is something to be said about that. There is nuance, and just because there's a commonality between these zones doesn't mean it's a contributing factor. And so we will get into exactly all of the nuances with the wine at 5. Loved ones first. So in America, we have this sort of independent, hyper independency to a fault, right? So we just want to live our lives, and we, not everyone, of course, we can forget about our families, but you know what? Life gets hard. Life is challenging. Life can be sad, and it can be, it can come with suffering and hardship. So sharing those times, as well as the good times, as well as celebrating with family, gives you a strong sense of belonging. And that belonging is right there, belonging to a community. This could be a religious community. It could be a group of friends that go out and, do things together. And then right tribe. So this is like your core group of friends. This is like having lifelong friends. And that's something that's extremely common in these blue zones. All right, I hope my stream isn't lagging because at least on my end, it looks like it might be. Let's now talk about the official Blue Zones dietary guidelines right from their website. Number 1, 95 to 100% plant-based. Number 2, go wholly whole. So reduce intake of processed foods. Number 3, daily dose of beans. 1 to 2 servings of beans, chickpeas, lentils, or split peas. 4, drink mostly water. 5, snack on nuts. 6, go easy on fish. 7, eliminate eggs. 8, slash sugar. 9, reduce dairy. And 10, retreat from meat. So we're going to look now at sort of how these go head to head in comparison with the red, white, and blue zone, America. So in terms of diet, blue zones are historically predominantly plant-based. So as we said, 90 to 100% depending on the cohort. Vegetables daily. Vegetables, as you guys probably know, are the highest nutrient density food in the world and the lowest calorie density. So you get the most bang for your buck with nutrients specifically while not getting a high caloric load. Beans and legumes as daily staples. And it turns out that legumes, we're going to come back to, they might even be the most important reason. High fiber, so commonly reported in the 25 to 35 gram range each day, in stark contrast to Americans, which get like 10 grams a day. Our ancestors had over 100 grams a day based on coprolites, which are ancient fossilized feces. We can determine that our antecedents were getting over 100 grams of fiber a day. Meat as only occasional or celebratory food. Roughly 5 times a month on average, or 15 to 50 grams a day across the blue zones. Or not at all in the case of many people in Loma Linda, about 50% of Loma Linda. Minimal ultra-processed foods. Emphasis on leafy greens, high consumption of fruits and whole grains. And legume consumption, so beans, split peas, chickpeas, lentils, they may be the most important dietary predictor of survival of any food. And I have an excerpt, I just need to locate it. So again, an excerpt from How Not to Age for anyone who's just joining us. Dr. Greger writes, the emphasis on minimally processed plant foods is consistent with studies on long-lived persons that date back more than a century, including ones on modern-day centenarians. Of all plants, beans appear most often as the dietary cornerstone for centenarians, as well as for individuals throughout each of the blue zones. A paper titled Legumes, the most important dietary predictor of survival in older people of different ethnicities, detailed a study in which researchers looked at 5 cohorts in Australia, Greece, Japan, and Sweden. Of the food factors investigated, the only one found to have a consistent and significant association with longer lifespan across the board was intake of legumes. Whether it was Swedes eating their brown beans and peas, Japanese eating their soy, or Greeks eating their lentils, chickpeas, and white beans. The researchers identified an 8% reduction in risk of death for every 20-gram increase in legumes consumed each day, which is just about 2 tablespoons worth. This is consistent with data from the Global Burden of Disease study that found that of all foods considered, the largest lifespan gains would be expected from eating more legumes. In the United States, for more than a decade now, the federal government has aimed to encourage Americans to build healthy meals with its My Plate campaign using the visual guide of a dinner plate. Vegetables and whole grains should fill most of it, and fruits and proteins should take up the remaining space. Legumes are given special treatment, though, straddling both the protein and vegetable groups. Legumes are loaded with protein, zinc, and iron, as you'd expect from other protein sources like meat, while being low in sodium and saturated fat, and they have 0 cholesterol. But they are also chock full of nutrients concentrated in the vegetable kingdom, like fiber, potassium, folate, making beans among the best bargains for nutrition density per dollar. In Costa Rica, researchers found that those who ate beans every day had a 38% lower risk of heart attack compared to non-bean eaters. This was after controlling for saturated fat and cholesterol. So it apparently wasn't just because they were eating beans instead of beef. Randomized control trials dating back as far as 60 years have proven that cardiovascular risk factors such as cholesterol, blood pressure, and markers of inflammation can be lowered simply by eating legumes, typically about a cup a day for 4 to 8 weeks. One study found that 2 daily servings of beans, chickpeas, lentils, and split peas cut cholesterol levels so much that many participants aged 50 and older fell out of the range that typically results in the prescribing of cholesterol-lowering statin drugs. Dozens of randomized control trials have found that soy can lower cholesterol and blood pressure, but compilations of more than 60 randomized control trials have found that other beans also lower cholesterol, as well as benefit blood sugars and lower insulin levels. Despite this overwhelming evidence, surveys suggest that most American consumers are unaware of these benefits. They don't know beans. And I'll finish with this. In some studies, beans replaced meat, which makes it impossible to tease out the effects of boosting beans versus moderating meat. Nevertheless, even interventional studies that pit beans, chickpeas, or lentils head-to-head against other healthy foods like whole grains show benefits in terms of cholesterol, blood pressure, and weight loss. One particularly instructive study added chickpeas to the diet for 5 months, which resulted in an average total cholesterol dropping from levels typical in the Western world, around 206 milligrams per deciliter, down to about 160, which is close to the target of under 150. Interestingly, the study was performed in northern India, so the participants' cholesterol levels actually started out at an average of 123. Only after packing their diets with saturated fat were they able to raise their cholesterol to typical American levels in order to test the effects of the chickpeas. So while it would be better to just eat healthier in the first place, why not eat healthier with hummus, a diet low in saturated fat with lots of legumes? So legumes and beans, split peas, chickpeas, lentils are perhaps the number one thing associated with longevity in a dietary sense. And if you're not eating them daily, maybe that's the first place to start. In the United States, and we've talked about this on previous shows, we typically get about 60% of our calories from ultra-processed foods. These are foods that have been stripped of their beneficial components or had negative things added to them, or processed in such a way where the actual components are more bioavailable, which is not necessarily a good thing. Like, for instance, when you pulverize wheat and you make, white flour or something, the calories are far more available to your body. And so that's going to, and the sugars there and the carbohydrates are going to raise your blood sugar much faster, much higher than just eating oat groats or wheat berries, for instance. There's also a JAMA study that showed that when you replace animal protein with plant protein, it can lower 24% lower risk of early death. When it comes to physical activity across the blue zones, because it's not just diet, like what are they doing with their bodies? How are they moving? So they build movement into their daily lives. In America, we go to the gym. That's the only place we exercise. We go to the park. We go to the track. But in blue zones, they're outside farming, gardening, playing. They have walking groups. They're walking steep terrain regularly. They're hiking or walking instead of taking the bus. They're riding bicycles instead of using a car. And so that sort of stuff replaces a lot of the need to go do the exercise because it's built in, which in some sense frees up your time to go do other stuff. And, you're using your body as nature intended. So in contrast, in America, we have very high rates of sedentary behavior. I don't have to remind you of that. And everyone has a different reason, whether it's, binge watching on Netflix or video games, or if you're a truck driver and that's what you do for a living, unfortunately, you're very sedentary. These are things that our ancestors, they had to do more manual labor, and they didn't sit at a computer in a cubicle typing at a keyboard all day. So there's strong differences. Now, psychosocial factors in the blue zones. As we talked about, in the blue zones, they have strong multi-generational family ties, tight community networks, regular faith-based or social rituals and parties and siestas, etc. They have a clear sense of purpose. In Nicoya, Costa Rica, they call it Plan de Vida. So in the United States, in contrast, we have, what do we have? We have rising rates of loneliness and social isolation, which is an independent risk factor for early mortality and dementia. So while you might say, well, I like being alone, or I know somebody who thrives being lonely, it's like, sure. And there are people who smoke cigarettes that don't get lung cancer. But on average, on the population level, isolation is a risk factor for all-cause mortality and dementia. Now, meta-analyses of prospective cohorts link social isolation to 30% higher all-cause mortality risk and elevated cardiovascular, cancer mortality, dementia. So it's pretty serious. Now, other shared traits that you're going to find across the blue zones, lower smoking rates, historically at least in many of the zones, environments that make healthier choices easier, so walkable villages and city streets, bike paths, gardens, limited access to like the highly engineered supermarket slop of the West. And earlier we talked about wine at 5 right there in purple on the bottom. So I want to now dig into that and describe like exactly why, sorry guys for all the noise in the background. We're going to talk about, is wine actually one of the strategies of the blue zones, or is that some sort of artifact, some sort of, is there a better explanation for it? And the answer, I don't know, may or may not surprise you, but a lot of people tend to think red wine, for instance, is extremely beneficial for longevity, because of the polyphenols from the grape skins, or because of the resveratrol or something along those lines. And so we've actually got a good amount of data on this, and check this out. A 20-year study of older adults found that any apparent mortality benefit of moderate wine drinking seemed to disappear when variables such as socio-demographic differences were taken into account. The grape polyphenols in red wine have antioxidant properties when tested in isolation, but alcohol acts as a pro-oxidant, increasing markers of oxidative damage within hours of consumption. So which wins out when you drink them together in wine? In the short term, the antioxidant power of red wine is enough to counteract the LDL oxidation of a bacon cheeseburger from McDonald's. But over a period of weeks, consumption of wine, whether white or red, does not reduce markers of oxidative damage unless the alcohol has been removed. Even when sugar is added to the dealcoholized wine to make the calorie count similar to regular red wine, a month of red wine consumption results in significantly more oxidative damage compared to consumption of the same wine with the alcohol removed. A comparable benefit blunting effect was found with the blood pressure. Non-alcoholic red wine lowers blood pressure, but regular red wine does not. So, might de-alcoholized wine offer the best of both worlds? If you eat cheese and crackers with red wine, you can end up with 5 times more triglycerides or fat in your blood 6 hours later than if you had drunk water with them instead. We know it's the alcohol because the same wine with the alcohol removed doesn't cause the same spilling of fat into the bloodstream. Red wine and white wine also cause inflammation. A 56% for red and 62% for white rise in IL-6 levels over the 6 hours after consumption, which is significantly higher than drinking a sugary beverage, which only raises it 11%. Although the effects of wine on artery function are mixed, the fatty, inflammatory reaction could explain the results of the largest study that showed that de-alcoholized wine improved artery function while regular red wine made things worse. So, there is your answer. When we talk about how there's this common observation across the blue zones that wine at 5 is something that these blue zones do, does that mean that it is one of the factors? Well, only if it's de-alcoholized. And we know that's the case. So alcohol, as you guys have heard me mention 100 times, the alcohol that we consume is ethanol. And according to the IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which groups different carcinogens based on the confidence interval of the research, how compelling the data is. For instance, group 1 is certain, group 2 is probably. So group 1 contains ethanol. Ethanol, or the alcohol in beer and wine and spirits, is a known carcinogen. That doesn't mean it's the most powerful carcinogen like plutonium or radon gas or something, but it is absolutely just as positively clear that it is a carcinogen as those. So de-alcoholized wine, go crazy. Alcoholic wine, hard no. Not going to help you live to 100 and beyond. Now, another question that comes up is, what about religion? For instance, the 4 blue zones that we showed which have vanished, Nicoya, Sardinia, Ikaria, and Okinawa, those were geographically isolated. The only advantage, or one of the advantages that Loma Linda has, is that it's a group of, it's a religious-based location. So in contrast to these other places, it's like a philosophical or religious compulsion to eat and live a certain way. But you might ask yourself, well, what about that religious component? Is that an independent, beneficial factor? And scientists have wondered this, and they've looked at it, and we have a pretty good answer to that too. Just like how we determined that alcoholic red wine is no good, but de-alcoholized wine is fine. Again, for anyone just joining us, How Not to Age, Dr. Michael Greger, he writes, Seventh-day Adventists are a Protestant Christian denomination. Might religiosity play a role? A poll of 1,000 U.S. adults reported that 79% of respondents believed that spiritual faith can help recover from disease. Might there be some truth to that? Well, a meta-analysis of more than 70 studies, that's 70 studies, on the topic found that measures of religiosity or spirituality were associated with reduced mortality rates in healthy populations, but not sick ones, and also identified evidence of publication bias, implying that some studies non-flattering to spirituality may have been quietly shelved. Even if the association were robust, there are important confounding factors. For example, mainline non-evangelical Protestants and Jews have the lowest mortality rates among major religious groups in the United States, but they are also likely to be disproportionately white, wealthy, and well-educated. And each factor on its own is linked to longevity. There is also the specter of reverse causation. In these studies, a common measure of faith is attendance of religious services, and you can imagine how developing a disease may prevent you from attending. Religious involvement has also been associated with longer telomeres, though unexpectedly, the longest telomeres were found in the least religious. For example, people reporting never praying or studying holy books like the Bible. But among those who were at least somewhat religious, more spiritual involvement was associated with longer telomere length. Religiosity could certainly be related directly to health outcomes through lifestyle choices, such as electing not to smoke or drink in excess, which tend to be characteristic of religious people, or in the case of the Adventists, a healthier diet. Might a predilection to stricter adherence to codes of conduct enable religious people to better stick to healthy lifestyle advice? Many of the Adventist plant-based diet and lifestyle tips have been put into action in the Complete Health Improvement Program, or CHIP, though recently rebranded as Pivio, the most extensively published community-based lifestyle intervention in the medical literature. The influence of religious affiliation on responsiveness to the program was tested in a group of 7,000 participants. Even though Adventists make up less than 1% of the U.S. population, about 1 in 5 CHIP participants were in the church. How did they do compared to the non-believers? Substantial reductions in cardiovascular risk factors were achieved for both Adventists and non-Adventists, and some of the reductions were actually greater among the non-Adventists. The researchers concluded that this indicates that the Seventh-day Adventists do not have a monopoly on good health. And so just to summarize, no, religiosity has nothing to do with how long you live. And for anyone in my audience who's religious, you might not like that answer. It is what it is. So yes, the religion, if it informs your diet and lifestyle choices, like not smoking, using your body like a temple, respecting your body, eating a healthy diet, then absolutely, of course it's going to help you live longer. But the non-religious had the longer telomeres. And of that group in the CHIP study, even though 1 in 5 participants were Seventh-day Adventists, even though they make up less than 1% of the population, so they had an outsized representation in this CHIP study, those who weren't Adventists in that CHIP study actually lived longer or had longer telomeres. So no, religion is not an independent variable for longevity. Its effects on your behavior and lifestyle are. Now, let's pivot. Let's talk about the American health crisis. We sort of talked about this at the top of the show. And just to dive a little deeper, so, in the global burden of disease study, the largest study of its kind ever done in history, showed that diet is the number one modifiable risk factor for early mortality, which means that if you do eat a healthy diet, then that is the number one thing that can help you live longer. If it's the number one reason people are dying and it's the number one modifiable risk factor, then improving diet across the world would save more lives than having more people exercise or take supplements or something along those lines. Or even quitting smoking, which was number 2, I think. And more exercise was like 6th or 7th on that list. So even though people think exercise, like you can outrun a bad diet, no. Exercise was 6th or 7th down that list in terms of having the largest effect on saving lives or taking them. So ultra-processed foods in America, every store in America, every gas station, it is the convenient go-to, grab-and-go foods choice for most people. Of course, beginning in the 1950s with much of the fast food restaurants and the TV dinners and the explosion of candy companies. 53 to 55% on average of total calories for U.S. adults and higher shares for children and adolescents, according to NHANES data from 2021 to 2023. We talked about actually a higher number on previous shows. I think it was 60% in more recent data. The average fiber intake in America is approximately 15 grams a day. Only about 5% of Americans meet the recommended levels of 25 to 38 grams a day, which is exactly the range that these blue zones are eating. So they're doing something right there. So high average meat and protein intake relative to traditional longevity populations. U.S. per capita meat availability historically in the 200-pound range annually versus far lower figures in the reported blue zone surveys. Now, there's this podcast. I watched a clip the other day, and this person was bashing blue zones and said that, well, I knew somebody who went to the blue zones, Icaria or Sardinia, and they found that actually the people eat far more meat there. They just don't call it red meat, but they're eating mutton, for instance, and they're not eating beef, and there's a translational language barrier. And so when they're reporting what they're eating, it's not necessarily true, and it's hard to find vegetarians and vegans there. And yes, this is recent, and of course this is exactly what we've been talking about. The historical blue zones, 4 out of 5 of them, no longer exist. Okinawa went from the leanest prefecture in Japan to the fattest. Complete 180 in 2 generations. So other trends are being seen across, these other blue zones, Nicoya, Icaria, and Sardinia. The same pattern follows. You go there now, and they're not eating traditional diets. So widespread sedentary patterns across America, declining physical activity is embedded into everyday life and our jobs are also atomizing us, and they're leading to social isolation, loneliness. We have heavy pharmaceutical reliance. We turn to drugs and surgery instead of turning to nutrition and lifestyle. And this results in metabolic dysfunction, multi-morbidity, and shortened healthy lifespans across the US compared to our peer countries. America ranks among the world's top 5 meat-consuming nations. We've talked about this in the past. Meat consumption across the world increases the wealthier the nation is, and we also showed that per capita availability or consumption of meat in America is projected to be higher in 2027 and beyond. Every single year it goes up. There's this myth that vegans are taking over and that we're eating less and less meat, and the fact is the exact opposite. Just like with most of these things, don't go to X, don't go to Twitter, don't go to Facebook or wherever you're getting, all this misinformation. These people regurgitate things without actually looking at the data, and we've pulled it up. We've pulled up the data in previous shows. So, for instance, if you want more on that specific one where we look at the charts and the projections for annual data, go watch my lecture called Debunking Veganism as a Tool for Feminizing Men and Depopulating or Culling Humanity Conspiracy Theory. And this leads us to the Hispanic paradox. So if we just went over how horrible American health outcomes are, well, there's an exception to that. And it's a very bizarre paradox. When we look at Hispanic Americans, Mexican Americans have better health outcomes on average than, the sort of native-born Americans. I'm not talking about Native Americans, but in this case, American-born individuals, particularly Caucasians and blacks. And so we're going to turn, once again, another excerpt from Surprise, How Not to Age. So he talks about the Hispanic paradox. The benefits of beans may help explain the so-called Hispanic paradox. Hispanic Americans, despite socioeconomic patterns that generally lead to worse health outcomes like disparities in education and healthcare, as well as higher rates of poverty, tend to live longer than other ethnic groups in the United States. With lower risks of 9 out of the top 15 causes of death, notably including less heart disease and cancer, Hispanics have a 24% lower risk of premature death. In a study of Mexican Americans, researchers found that, compared with other groups, they not only eat more beans, but also more fruits and vegetables, including tomatoes and corn. These healthy dietary patterns extend down to Central America too. After rice and beans, corn tortillas are the most commonly eaten food in the Costa Rican blue zone, Nicoya. They also eat more chili peppers. So, despite having lower socioeconomic status, they have lower rates of 9 out of the top 15 chronic diseases. Amazing, and it's because of their diet. Okay, now I want us to get in a time machine. So we've been talking about blue zones and the red, white, and blue zone in modernity. Now we're going to get in our time machine. We're going to go back to pre-World War I and pre-World War II and look at those time periods and discuss the massive changes in both our agricultural system as well as our food system, and then the spillover effects into our healthcare system, which is really a sick care system. So pre-World War II and early 20th century, American diets were closer to the traditional patterns in many respects. Like 45% of food was grown in backyard gardens. 45% of the nation's food was grown in backyard gardens. No chemical pesticides, which really became a thing in about 1949. And infectious disease mortality was falling rapidly. We had better sanitation. We had lower childhood mortality. We had antibiotics and other thing. We had an explosion of nutrition science and epidemiological data. And then World War II and post-war period, we had military-driven development of shelf-stable, highly processed foods, subsequent commercialization and marketing of convenience products. So your Betty Crocker just add egg, your TV dinners, your fast food restaurant chains, taking over, along highways and even in every city and eventually small rural communities. Everywhere the urban sprawl went, you had the ultra-processed food sprawl. And so it became a convenient go-to choice for Americans. Now, when it comes to agriculture, as we mentioned, 45% of food was grown in backyard gardens, and there was a heavy reliance on small family farms. These were in the 5 to 50 acre range. Compare that or contrast that with some of the modern farms that can be, tens of thousands of acres in some cases, monocropping, and only able to endure and sustain because of a heavy reliance on chemical fertilizers and pesticides, herbicides, fungicides, and the like. So during World War I, we saw the first wave where the government urged Americans to raise chickens for eggs and poultry consumption. And we're going to look now at an example this was for World War I. You can see the date right here. It says 1918. And Uncle Sam expects you to keep hens and raise chickens. Of course, all things could be done with good faith, and I'm not lambasting the intentions and saying that this was some ploy to make Americans sicker. I'm just saying that this was one of the tectonic plates that began to shift during World War I. Everything was affected. We know that the manufacturing base of America was leveraged to help win the war, but also the food system was changed in a foundational way. And you saw this push for Americans to eat more eggs, eat more poultry. And absolutely, look, they're right here. They're correct. You can raise chickens very easily in your backyard, and they're easy to maintain as far as livestock goes, and they can eat ticks, and there's these other benefits. They can eat your food scraps, and all of that is true. But when it comes to eating higher levels of poultry, we know that is one of the highest sources of dietary phthalates, which are gender bender chemicals. And eggs are extremely high in cholesterol. And so they're just, they're not necessarily the best packages for nutrition because they come with these other risk factors. You can get high concentrations of heavy metals in their bones because they are grazers. And so if you're using their bones for bone stock or bone broth, then that's another risk factor right there. Here's another example. Do not sell laying hens, save the 30 eggs or more laid by the average hen from February to May. And all spring she will be turning insects, weeds, garbage, and waste into eggs for the nation. It's both patriotic and profitable to keep the laying hen, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This is, a similar message to what we're seeing today under RFK and Brooke Rollins. And we're going to go now to this website, the Silver Homestead. I don't know much about them, but they've done a great compilation of photographs and facts of the victory flocks pushed during the 1940s. And some of these posters are a riot. Our allies need eggs. Your farm can help. produce more food for defense. So more eggs, more milk, more pork. Doesn't say anything about growing wheat, soy, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots, tomatoes, none of that. They had expos teaching people how to build coops and normalizing backyard chicken flocks, a victory flock for the backyard, the farm flock. And so, yeah, these were very, very, very common during World War I and World War II. They talk about how you can use artificial lighting to heat the eggs and keep the chicks warm. Victory in an eggshell. Chickens drafted for the duration. More egg producers needed. This was a big push. And any of the grain that they were growing, they were setting that aside to feed to the cattle and the chickens. Big new white egg. Big money makers. Yeah. There's a lot of these examples. Saw that one. Save kitchen scraps to feed the hens. Food is a weapon. I agree with that. That's great. So yeah. So there was a big push there. And this idea that we had to feed the troops beef and we had to feed them chicken, this was where I think a lot of Americans started to imbibe and internalize the notion that meat was equivalent to protein, and that protein was not found anywhere in the plant kingdom, which is a joke. And proteins are found across the plant kingdom. We did an entire show on that. Go watch that. And of course, when it comes to the outcomes associated with plant-based proteins versus animal-based proteins, you have lower all-cause mortality in the plant-based protein group in the largest study ever done of its kind. When it comes to agriculture, in World War I and World War II, there was the push for pork, beef, poultry, eggs. This was the big go-to national patriotic undertaking. After the 1950s into the 1970s and onward, you had agricultural subsidies becoming normalized for big farms. Surplus grains were converted into high fructose corn syrup as a sweetener, and also later ethanol for cars. You had refined flours and cheap oils. You had the rapid expansion of fast food and ultra-processed product lines. And now I want to read one last excerpt from the book here. So everything we just discussed, the push towards the animal-based proteins, and that was going to make our soldiers stronger and fight better, and that sort of internalized as a concept for Americans. Well, we have a lot of very interesting research when it comes to swapping meat for plant-based proteins. And so open your mind and listen to this. In the United States, the number one risk factor for dying is the American diet. Associated with the most deaths, primarily from cardiovascular disease, about 500,000 mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers and friends die every year simply because of what they eat. In stark contrast, plant-based diets are associated with a lower risk of developing cardiovascular disease to begin with, a lower risk of dying from cardiovascular disease, and in fact, a lower risk of dying from all causes put together. Progressively increasing our intake of plant foods by reducing how many animal foods we consume may enable us to live longer, healthier lives, and it doesn't take much. Listen to this. The largest cohort study of diet and health in history, the NIH AARP study, found that replacing just 3% of daily calories from animal protein with plant protein was associated with a 10% lower risk of overall mortality in both men and women. Meat consumption alone was associated with greater risks of dying from heart disease, cancer, and prematurely in general. This led to an accompanying editorial titled "Reducing Meat Consumption Has Multiple Benefits for the World's Health," published in the Archives of Internal Medicine, the Journal of the American Medical Association, calling for a major reduction in total meat intake. Now, of all the animal protein sources, eggs were found to be the worst. Swapping in 3% of daily calories with plant protein instead of egg protein, found mostly in the egg whites, was associated with twice the benefit of swapping out meat protein, exceeding 20% lower mortality in men and women. So, eggs appeared to be worse than red meat. The researchers concluded that the findings that plant protein was preferable provides evidence for, quote, dietary modifications in choice of protein sources that may promote health and longevity. What about the effects of dietary intake of animal versus plant protein on aging? Healthy aging is defined as, quote, the process of developing and maintaining the functional ability that enables well-being in older age. A higher intake of plant protein has been associated with less accumulation of deficits based on functional impairments, self-reported health and vitality, mental health, diseases, and the use of health services. Swapping in just 1% of calories from plant protein in place of animal protein led to significantly less deficit accumulation. Now, you may be thinking that animal protein and animal fat travel alongside each other in the same foods, so the benefits of this swap may have just been a saturated fat effect, but even after accounting for that, there still seems to be something about the animal versus plant protein sources. It's still not clear, however, if the beneficial health effects are due to an avoidance of deleterious effects associated with animal foods or the addition of beneficial effects of plants, though it may be a little bit of both. And so, that is why we just spent the last 15 minutes talking about the push for eggs in World War I and World War II. If eggs are worse than meat as a protein source, and you have all of this pretty tragic data on the outcomes associated with egg protein consumption and the benefits of plant protein consumption, then you could see that during World War I and World War II, when there was a nationwide push for 30 eggs a week or whatever from your backyard chickens, and that even cutting down on beef as they were sending that to the soldiers. So you could say that before World War I and before World War II, when Americans were consuming the cow rather than the eggs, that there were even better health outcomes associated with that. So shifting from the gardens, right, all your fruits and veggies, your whole grains, beans, legumes, nuts and seeds, and even mushrooms, and switching over to animal foods, but then specifically eggs, highest in cholesterol and with really bad egg white protein, resulted in a sudden and rapid deterioration, or I should say a rapid and sudden increase in heart disease, atherosclerosis, dementia, and other cancers. So yeah, it's pretty crazy. And this is all in context with the shift towards chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, ultra-processed foods, fast food, more calories available. Binge eating became far more common. So it's multifactorial, but when it comes to rates of chronic disease that are clearly universal pathways, go back and watch my presentation, Unifying Theory of Chronic Disease, Shared Pathways, Shared Solutions. Once again, this all roads lead back to Dr. Dean Ornish's diet and his findings and his hypothesis that there are these unifying pathways that etiologically manifest in all of the chronic diseases that we're seeing nowadays, and that he says, eat less, move more, stress less, love more. That's the Blue Zone philosophy in a nutshell. Dr. Dean Ornish basically wrote the mantra for the Blue Zones inadvertently with that advice. And so there was also this shift during World War II to CAFOs, concentrated animal feedlot operations, where these cows, chickens, turkeys, and pigs never see a blade of grass, and they have 100,000 heads of cattle being managed by a dozen cowboys. It's bonkers. There's never been a more efficient system for producing meat, and yet it's so inefficient. There's nothing like it in terms of creating water pollution, water consumption, ocean dead zones from the runoff. You have deforestation, and the amount of oil that goes into fossil fuels that go into the production of that system, the maintenance of that system. It's the least effective. I mean, if everybody just had a backyard garden, and instead of growing hundreds of pounds of plants to feed to the cow to eat the 1 pound of beef, just eat the plants and feed 100 people, it's a no-brainer in terms of the efficiency on the human side. If you want the efficiency for the meat production, then there's never been anything like it, and it's insane. And even the health outcomes of the livestock are dismal. If you take I heard this once, so fact check me on this, because I haven't actually fact checked it in a long time, but I heard once that if you take a cow that has E. coli in its gut and you take them off of a grain diet like corn and you put them onto grass, that E. coli colony will diminish within 2 weeks. So get the animals back on their natural diets, please, and we should get on a healthier dietary path as well. So alongside all of these trends, the change in farming and agricultural equipment, you have, like, for instance, plows and combines and harvesters and other infrastructure for the mass production of not only animal products but plant crops too. It's been a wild century to observe the effects on the food system and on our health outcomes. And obesity is now, more common than starvation. We have far more people dying of excess than of deficiency. And lastly, with culture, there have been so many cultural shifts in America. Car dependence after the National Highway something act, where now roads connect every city, and our means of transportation is a very sedentary one. People will drive from city to city, from job to home, from home to job, to their friends' houses. They spend so much time behind the steering wheel just to get to a cubicle where they sit and continue to be sedentary. We have the decline of multi-generational households in America, and we have this opioid crisis, deaths of despair, as they call them, simultaneous, like a convergence of multiple epidemics layered on top of the underlying chronic disease, metabolic disease, autoimmune disease, epidemics. So to sort of summarize what we've been talking about, the things that actually separate thriving populations from declining ones, these are the modifiable risk factors. Dietary patterns that are based on whole foods over single nutrients. So high fiber, high whole plant food density, low ultra processed, modest animal protein intake. These are the things that we see in the blue zones. These are the things that we don't see in the rest of the world. Movement as a default. So environments and routines that produce frequent low to moderate activity loads outperform these sort of sporadic, intense bursts at a gym or a track. Social connection and purpose. These are robust in blue zones, and they're robust with evidence too. And the opposite, the isolation, has been linked with early mortality, cancers, heart disease, and dementia. Avoidance of the major industrial food innovations, so hyper palatable, ultra processed foods, including things that have high sodium, high sugar, high fat, chemical dyes, chemical sweeteners, preservatives, excessive refined carbohydrates, and a shift away from whole foods. Now, as we mentioned earlier, genetics only play a minority role in the variance in longevity, about 20% or so. The rest is environment and behavior and diet. And practical strategies. What can you take away from this presentation? So prioritize fiber, prioritize legumes, vegetables daily. Aim way above the US average. Shift your protein sources as much as you can towards plants, and particularly away from eggs, while keeping total protein moderate rather than maximal. Go watch my show, Stop Obsessing About Protein. Treat meat as occasional or celebratory, if at all. Dramatically reduce ultra-processed calories. Build movement into your day, walking, gardening, stairs instead of elevators. Walk the parking lot instead of parking by the door. Active commuting, so bicycling, walking, hiking, these sorts of things. Don't just rely on that gym session for exercise. Protect and cultivate your close relationships and try to maintain them over the course of your life. The people who you maintain relationships with over the course of your life are more likely to be there for you when you need them most, and vice versa. Create micro environments like your home food environment. Keep your fridge and pantry stocked with healthy foods, not things that are going to tempt you. Don't shop at the grocery store when you're hungry. Keep a strong social circle that's going to hold you accountable. Build healthy daily routines. Make your house and the places that you frequent healing places and calming places. And find your group, whatever that is. This can be a religious group. This can be a sport, a hobby. Find a group where you can fit in, laugh a lot, and have strong social ties that will combat isolation. So the red, white, and blue zone, America, we are a dying, deathly, sick, disgusting population. And I wish it wasn't the case. Everywhere you go now, obesity is the norm. It's more common in some places than average, not average, normal BMI. And so we have to take a strong, hard look at our food system, our agricultural system, and ultimately, as much as we can try to leverage those things and affect them in ways that might benefit the world and other people's health, none of that even matters when it comes to you doing the right thing for you and your family. You should be your own doctor. You should be your own researcher. You should hold yourself accountable. You should take proactive measures rather than reactive measures, and just generally try your best to treat your body like they do in Loma Linda. Treat your body with respect and reverence like it is a temple. That's all I got. I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. We made a bunch of announcements at the very beginning of the show, so if you missed them, please go back and rewatch that. If you aren't a member yet, I encourage you to become one, because we are a pretty cool media company and we produce awesome content, groundbreaking documentaries. We have a bunch that are going to be coming out here shortly. Check out our awesome website. There's so much to discover, so many series and feature films, things to dive into and learn something. We have so many different topics that we cover. And if you want to support us in another way and go above and beyond, click on shop and you will be brought to our web store. You can find all sorts of merch with our iconography on it. And if you want to support us but you aren't in love with this clothing line, well, good news. We have 2 others. Click on Signature Series here at the top, and you can support the Vibes series that Adrian has done. Bear with me. My internet is a bit slow right now. Hopefully the show is coming through clearly. We have 2 Signature Series supportive of the Vibes series, and these collections are really cool, really awesome, really unique, pretty trippy. It reminds me of Pink Floyd. Awesome stuff. And we appreciate each of you for hanging out with us. We love you guys. It's been real, and I hope you got something out of this show. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for hanging out with me today. As always, my time here with you is an honor, and please share the show with your friends. Smash that like button. I love you all. I'll see you next week. Stay healthy. Peace.